Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're the committee that looks at the 1,000 cuts. That's our job here, and to look at how we can, in fact, create a system where you have a feeling like, or that you actually have had input on the front end, which is one of the issues that we heard this morning, which is it's that like input, and then this rulemaking takes forever, and it leaves this great deal of uncertainty, which causes a retraction in people's willingness to expand as they're waiting to find out what's that going to look like at the end. And so the chilling factor of pending rules on business development. But I want to get at 2 points because, again, we're the big picture folks here. I know I say that word funny because I'm from darn near Canada. Anyway, so let's talk about retrospective or retroactive review. Senator Langford and I have been working on this issue. We've been talking about doing it on major rules, making sure that we have embedded within major rules a process for look back so that we actually, not only do you have that process available, but you as small business owners commenting can help fashion what that retrospective review is going to look like. Mr. Palmari, you mentioned the need for improved retrospective review in the small business space. Do you have specific ideas about how we can improve the 610 review process, and how we can get at, I mean, every administration comes in and says, we're going to reinvent government, we're going to get rid of all these rules, and you saw it in the Clinton administration with some success, and then it just kind of, it's like yeast. You know, it just starts blowing up again, people punch it down, but we never quite get at stopping that cycle of the growth. And so I'm curious about retrospective review and how we should be doing it differently, and if you're aware of the work that we've been doing on retrospective review.
Absolutely aware of the work you've both been doing. You're leaders on regulatory reform, and we look to you. And certainly your legislation on planning for retrospective review we think is very important. We're supportive of that legislation. As far as improving the process overall, I think the challenge that most administrations, Republican and Democratic administrations alike, have faced is that they try to do it alone. They try to do it without Congress. And when they try to do it without Congress, when they say, direct their agencies, go and look for all the regulations you can fix, it's fix on your own, right? So as soon as they run into a statutory requirement, they say, well, we can't touch this rule because it's required by statute. Or if we tried to reform or undo or change, we would need to go to Congress first. And so that ends their discussion. So unless there's a combined congressional administration discussion that results in a final product, either the administration being required to send you a package of legislative reforms to implement those changes from retrospective review, or like Senator King and Senator Blunt with the Regulatory Improvement Act, a commission-based approach where the two entities are working together and there's clearly a legislative package that will come to you, we will never realize the full benefits of retrospective review. And then certainly in my testimony and other places, much more thoughtful people than me have suggested, please.
I don't mean to interrupt, but
course.
I'm really intrigued by this idea that we then, anyone who has kind of watched these hearings that the chairman and I have had know that I hit on this all the time, that we have a real fun time as members of Congress beating up on the bureaucrats, but the bureaucrats, you know, feel many times like, wait a minute, you guys are the ones who wrote these rules, or you know that this has been a problem. Let's take waters of the United States. We've been in and out of the Supreme Court on waters of the United States, back and forth, for 30 years. Isn't it time for Congress to legislate and say, this is the lane? As long as we're just letting EPA and the court decide, they're going to spill out. Then the Supreme Court comes, and then they spill out, and we don't get any certainty to American business. So I want to ask you about this idea of submitting a legislative package. You know, that the regulator is saying, look, we think this is crazy. We don't want to do this, but we have to do it because it's a mandate, and we don't want an IG report. We don't want a GAO report on this. Here's your list of legislative fixes that we can all agree. Has that ever been done, or, you know, has that ever been embedded in any regulatory reform package that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
It's a really good idea. It's a really good idea. And I wonder, you know, as we kind of move forward to think about that, because I totally agree with you. It's like talking over each other and pointing fingers, and we get nothing done. It's just an excellent suggestion. Thank you so much. Ms. Harned, could you offer any insights for us in this lane as well?
Well, yes, I would agree with Mr. Palmieri that, you know, regulatory, and you and Ms. Senator Langford, retrospective review is critical because we have so many laws on the books that are not, or regs on the books that are not needed anymore, but you do have the statutory backup. And one of the things I would say also is, it has, over the last decade or so, we're seeing so many of the laws that are coming out of Congress that are giving the agencies even more authority and have much more ambiguity throughout them, which lets the bureaucrats make all of the decisions in the end. And we really think that we need to go back and specially tailor the legislation that's coming out of Congress at the beginning that really is getting your intent into the agency's hands so that they really have a very clear roadmap of what they're looking at going in. That has not been happening. The Affordable Care Act actually is a great example of that, as is a number of acts. And so that would be one other thing I would add, is that there just needs to be more clarity in the drafting on the beginning when new mandates are going to go into effect.
That presupposes that this isn't done on purpose. We all know this is purposeful. It's like, we can't deal with that. It's too contentious. We're going to send it over there and then make judgments about the decisions they make on either side, depending upon who's in charge. That's no way to legislate. That is absolutely ignoring our constitutional responsibility. I totally agree. I want to get at the other issue that I think is critical, which is state and local regulation and the intersection between state and local regulation, because we haven't quite had a discussion here about that, and whether any of you on the panel can offer some suggestions on how we can institutionalize better coordination, better dialogue, more opportunities for you to better understand how all of this works together. And we'll start with you, Ms. Russell.
Thank you. That's actually a very interesting topic for us. In my company, we're about 100 employees, and we cover about 15 states. And every single state is completely different. Everything we do when it comes to taxes or HR or whatever within that state and for those individuals, it varies. And so that's a tough question for us because, of course, we have the federal rules, regulations, Department of Labor, and then we have those things that each state is mandating. We've actually had to run separate payrolls sometimes because of one state needing it this way or one state needing it that way, you know, in different formats or timing. And that would be something awesome if we could get every state on the same page. How do we do that, right? Every state is run differently, every state is governed differently, and they're individuals from that perspective. And that would be extremely helpful, I know, for small businesses looking at the state level when you're looking over multi-states for employment.
I mean, and not to interrupt, because I want to hear from everyone, and we run a kind of a loose ship here, if I can just offer a couple more. You know, you look at the Uniform Commercial Code, which was designed to, you know, create, you know, for all of these various jurisdictions to come together and say, here's commercial rules so that it's easier to do business across borders. This is, I mean, so it's a great model, but now we've kind of, with all of the business interaction and with more multi-state businesses, we don't have something that's similar to that on payroll. We don't have something that's similar to that on other kind of, you know, OSHA regulations where you can feel comfortable if you're in compliance in Oklahoma that you're going to be in compliance in North Dakota. And, you know, I'm a big believer in the 10th Amendment. I came out of state government. And so I'm not someone who says that there should be mandates here, but I think there is a great interest that I have in trying to incentivize states to coordinate better, to try and create opportunities for regional businesses so that those small businesses can grow. So I guess, you know, Oklahoma, what do you see from your perspective? Does your business, Jerry, go regionally, or are you just in the state of Oklahoma?
Well, we've done business in other states. We actually have an office in Topeka, Kansas, which is
I'm sorry.
the northern annex of Oklahoma. But my perception of your question, and reshape me if I'm heading in the wrong direction, but my understanding of the question is, how do states perceive what's required of them of the federal law and the regulations that they put in place in order for us to meet, and for them as well to meet the federal law? What we see on our side of the deal, we have, of course, in our mainstay, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which is a federal document, part of Title 47, so that signs and barricades and the methodology is uniform across the United States. But each state is, first of all, adopts that as their basic, but every regulation they put in place beyond that is their perception of what it takes in order to meet the federal law. We find the same thing with our compliance in the Davis-Bacon. And part of my submitted testimony has to do with how do we determine wage rates. Well, in Oklahoma, it's done a certain way so that we have like 9 or 10 or 11 different wage rates based upon regions, just so that Oklahoma's version of compliance with the Davis-Bacon wage law for fair wages for the construction employees makes sense. It's different for us when we go to Kansas. We have their perception of that same law when we're doing our certified payroll reports. And so each state, I believe, is doing their best to come up with their own regulations and their own operations in order to, from their perception, meet the requirements of the federal law. I don't know if there's a way that we can get the folks together and say, okay, what we really need from you at the federal level is this kind of information in this kind of a format. And that would, in my opinion, cause uniformity, at least in regions, but very possibly all the way across the entire country.
You know, and that's a great specific example of what I'm getting at. But you know, again, we're up here. We're not the Commerce Committee that deals with the transportation issues. So we're trying to figure out how we put opportunities in place to have that discussion and maybe have a greater collaboration with state and local entities about what we're hearing here about regulation, either implementing federal programs or just payroll is a great example. I mean, every state's going to have a different kind of requirement. They may have different safety requirements beyond what OSHA has, and you have to know all of that. And there's got to be, you know, in North Dakota, we implemented one-stop shopping so that we could get all of, you know, whether it was workers' comp and unemployment and, you know, as tax commissioner, registration for sales tax, retail licensing. You know, so we tried to consolidate where people would go, but, you know, you look at the different definitions of employer. I mean, there's just a classic example. You know, maybe we have one here for the IRS, one here for OSHA, one here for all of the other provisions. And all of that creates compliance costs. And so, Mr. Palmieri, can you offer anything on state and local regulation?
Sure. I mean, I think one place to look for feedback on this issue is offices of kind of state economic development entities, because the best ones are focused not just on, you know, providing extra resources or whatever, but helping a business, a manufacturer or other that wants to build a new facility to go through the permitting process in their state. And they can identify for you, you know, here are the things that we've improved in our state and made easier than maybe another state, but here's the federal overlay of things that still make it more difficult for us to help a business build a new facility, increase jobs or retain jobs in a state. And I think that would be one place to go. I'd say, at a minimum, the Office of Advocacy in SBA had a program for a number of years where they were encouraging states to adopt their own regulatory flexibility laws. So actually being advocates at the state level because of exactly what you've identified for reforms to make state regulation more small business friendly as well.
Before we populate the states with that model, we need to make sure that the Office of Advocacy gets listened to here in Washington, D.C. And just one last comment, and then I'll
Yes,
back to the chairman.
I thank you, Senator Heitkamp, for the question. We have actually a very active member in Texas who really points up this issue quite well. He's been very much, he views a partnership with the Texas Safety and Health Organization down there. They have inspected his business. He's got strong workers' comp insurance. That person has inspected his business. And I've spoken to him and even the commission down there, and I said, well, if somebody, you go in and you say, this business is good, they've taken care of everything we had, if we had any concerns, what does that mean at the federal level? Basically nothing. And that really is something that I think we should fix. We need to eliminate the number of boxes that business owners need to check. They need to be able to know, hey, okay, I've checked this box, I'm good, and not worry that there's somebody going to come around the corner the next day and say, oh, but you're not because you haven't gotten my box checked. There has to be more collaboration in that area, I think, to minimize the burden on them and the people that are coming to them with different requests and concerns.
Thinking maybe advocacy belongs at OMB and not at SBA.
Well, so it's an independent entity,
Right,
right?
but-
It shares, space and resources, and where it sits wouldn't matter to us as much, but I think if you talk to folks who work at advocacy, there's probably something about being
Being in
kind of
at-
a part of that. I've also seen proposals years ago of spinning off the Office of Advocacy and making it its own independent commission so that it was free of all agencies and had more independence. But to us, what's most important is that it has resources and authority because it does excellent work across Democratic and Republican administrations and is the only voice sometimes that will raise its hand against the administration's priority, whether it's EPA or OSHA or others, and say, we disagree. And that's such an important voice to have in this process.
Right, I couldn't agree more, and when we're talking about taking that model and populating it in the states, we need to refine it here. I've been enormously, because I sit on the Small Business Committee, we hear from the advocacy folks, and I think there's enormous frustration that they do great work, they point out all the problems, and it just falls on deaf ears because someone says, we don't agree with you. There needs to be a very strong message from Congress that these are our folks. These are our folks who are doing the watchdog work of Congress, making sure that we're not overly and unnecessarily burdening small business, or at least we have that perspective. So we're very interested in what we should be doing to reform or enhance or make that an entity that feels like, man, that the agencies feel like, man, we better find out what they're going to say because there's going to be a whole lot of people up on Capitol Hill not happy if these folks say they were ignored. So your perspective is some of the solutions that come out of advocacy are geared towards businesses that may not really need that kind of assistance compared, or they don't reflect what's actually happening for truly smaller businesses?
Oh, I'm sorry. So I didn't mean that for advocacy. I meant on these small business advocacy review panels where you do have the
Okay.
panel process. Sometimes they are supplied primarily
They're
with
populated
people.
by people who
Right.
you think don't really understand what that is for the five-guy body shop guy.
Correct.
Who, there's no way, he even has the ability to do payroll, he contracts all the business stuff out. He don't want to think about this, but all of a sudden he's stuck with some new rule on what a spray tent will look like, and he's not represented or she's not represented.
Correct. And part of that also is, the time that it will take for the small business owner to participate in finding that person, right? But that's also where technology can be so beneficial, so that it doesn't seem like such a cumbersome ask for them when the government is asking for their opinions, because I think that also would help get more engagement from that community in this process.
And here's another example. A contractor of mine had a project in San Francisco. It got stalled out for funding, and I think there was a disagreement about how they were going to do it. They had to file Davis-Bacon reports every week saying, I did not employ anyone for 2 years. 104 reports saying, I have nothing to report. Or they would have been fined. And so those are the things that I would hope, regardless of how, where you are on the political spectrum, we all could agree that's just crazy. That's just wrong. And so I think that in this area, there's going to be some low-hanging fruit that will be really easy to work on. And then there's some systemic kinds of discussions, whether it's judicial review, which we go back on. I mean, we kind of know.
I'm right on, by the way.
Yeah, sometimes. Guidance, which we go back and forth on. I can kind of try and explain to the chairman that sometimes people need guidance, and that's very valuable. Anyway, but if you went and looked at low-hanging fruit, I think you had a great list. I think we're going to need to kind of examine that, Karen, and try and figure out how much of that would be easy to do. But we are really committed to listening, really committed to a system where people don't feel like there is an adversarial relationship in accomplishing the work of the people of this country. And so just want you to know, I'm going to have to scoot off here a little bit because I have another appointment, but want you to know that this is just a great beginning for our committee.
Right.
Having you all here, I want to thank you for your input, thank you for your statements, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue about so many good ideas that have been advanced here.
Yeah.